This past week, the most noteworthy financial news was the downgrade of the U.S. credit for our Treasury bonds down from a status of AAA down to AA plus. That's a big deal. That was done by the Fitch rating agency. They're one of three. Standard & Poor's, Moody's, and Fitch are the three rating agencies. And Fitch made this downgrade, and both the Treasury and the equity markets responded negatively to that. Hi, I'm Ben Repond. Welcome to my YouTube broadcast. Today is August 7, 2023. So I'm going to play for you a clip. I'm going to play the entire clip. It's actually about 6 minutes long, much longer than I normally devote to videos. And it's of Senator Joe Manchin from the state of West Virginia. And then I'm going to play one where former Senator Tom Coburn is interviewed by Norah O'Donnell and back then Charlie Rose. And so it's kind of both sides of the aisle. I normally don't get into politics, and the reason I don't is because there's a lot of political commentary and information on the internet. If you want that, or even if you don't want it, you're going to get a lot of it just about wherever you look. So I just stay away from that because I can't really add to anything that's being said. But we're going to get into the debt, and this is political. So I'm going to show, some of this will relate to Congress and both the House and the Senate. I'm going to begin with this piece from Joe Manchin because I'm playing all of this because I went through it and everything he said was something you need to hear. I couldn't clip it to give you the significance of what he's saying. It is excellent. I appreciate him saying it. I wish every senator and congressman would take this position. They don't. He's rare, actually. And but he says it. He talks straight, and I think you'll enjoy this. So he is talking about the U.S. This is actually just the truth. I mean, you or I may not want to hear it, but it's the truth. The U.S., he says, is a train wreck, and it is getting ready to go over the fiscal cliff, the cliff of fiscal responsibility. And we as a country, at some point, I'll just be honest with you, we're going to collapse. We're going to collapse on the weight of our debt and the interest on our debt. So I'm going to cover both, the debt and the interest and what's going on right now. And so this interview came from last week. And from his office in Washington, D.C., he called New York to get a hold of Joe Kernan, the primary host of CNBC. And Joe was on vacation last week. So Joe Kernan was on vacation. So Becky Quick, I guess, is his backup. So she took the call, and she's doing the phone interview with Senator Manchin. So, but he says it directly, and what can you do about it? That's where I kind of go with this. What can you and I do about it is, since it's political, we can elect people, vote for people who are willing to tackle this, which means not voting to spend money or voting against spending money, even if it aligns with their political ideology. Don't spend the money if we don't have it. Or how do we cut money out of waste that's already there? There is not an attitude of this in Washington, but that's what we can do about it, is asking those questions and being willing to vote for people who stand for fiscal responsibility, which we do not have now. So I want you to listen to this from Senator Manchin.
Senator Joe Manchin actually reaching out to our very own Joe Kernan, who's on vacation this week. He's got a message for the Squawk Box audience when it comes to that Fitch downgrade. He says it's a stark warning to both political parties and to the White House. Joining us right now on the Squawk Newsline is West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin himself. And Senator, thanks for calling in today. This downgrade from Fitch.
Good morning to all three of you, Becky. Thank you.
Good morning. Good to hear from you, Senator. This warning from Fitch, even though a lot of investors have said that it doesn't change their opinion on what happens with this, they do say that Fitch raises some valid concerns. And one of the things that Fitch pointed to was governance, that it has gotten much more complicated, much more difficult. What are your thoughts when you hear this downgrade?
Well, I was concerned. Let me just put it in perspective. I got elected to be governor of West Virginia in November of 2004. And we had a low credit rating from all three, Fitch, Standard & Poor's, and Moody's. First thing I did, a week after I got elected in November, I didn't take office until the second week in January of 2005. I went to New York, and I asked all three. I went to all three offices, and I said, tell me about my state. I just got elected CEO of a company called West Virginia. Tell me what you think about it. And they gave it unfiltered truth about where our challenges were and why we were in a downgrade situation. I said, what can I do to improve it? My Achilles heel was my workers' comp, and it was basically killing our state and our employment and our economy and everything. So I had to go back, and with 1 week, we changed, and we privatized workers' comp, and now we have the lowest rates in the country just about on workers' comp. It's a great place to do business, and people have come, and we've grown. So I know it means something. So what I did yesterday, I called Paul Taylor, CEO of Fitch's, over in England. Got him last night. We had a nice talk, and he explained to me. He said, "Listen, it's been 12 years since Standard & Poor's downgraded." He said, "Nothing's going to happen, Joe." He says, "I don't think anything's going to happen anytime soon, but we can see this for the last 20 years." So when you look at 21 years that we have spent more than we've taken in, you can blame whoever you want to, starting with George W. Bush up to present. Democrats and Republicans are guilty. And we've got to fix this, and we're not taking it seriously. So I welcome this news that Fitch has given us to get our governance, our financial house in order, if you will, and take it serious. And to put other things in perspective, we just did for the first time in 5 years in this Senate, we passed all 12 of our approach bills. But here's what you don't know. The deal that was made on the Fiscal Responsibility Act that basically the President Biden and Kevin McCarthy came to an agreement on of what the caps would be. In order to get the 12 bills out, it was raised $13.7 billion. So the only thing that's keeping us working in a bipartisan way is if we can spend more money. And I made a comment, and I spoke out in the Probst meeting that this is wrong. That, my goodness, it's not going to be what happens in the House. And when people are saying there could be a government shutdown, that's what they're saying. There's so much difference in how do we spend, why do we have to continue to spend, and why can't we curtail it? Just basically a little bit of the responsibility that we have and have the ability to come to agreement that we have a fiscal runaway train that has grown. And when you think the last time that we actually passed a budget on time by September 30th, was 1997. In 1997, you're talking about $5.5 trillion of debt, which they thought was horrendous at that time. And now we're at $32.5 trillion. So yes, I do take that serious, and I am doing everything I can to make sure that we are responsible.
Do you have other people in the Senate, other people in the House who you think agree with you on this? Because you're right. The only thing bipartisan, the only thing that keeps things going is when both sides agree to spend more. Do you
That's
have
exactly right.
other people there who are of the same mindset you are, who would say, yes, we need to do something about this, and we need to get together and do it now? Who would you point to? Who are other?
Well,
other
Becky, I'm not going to point anybody out. I think that everyone knows that. First of all, there's not a person in America that's listening to you right now or watching that can go 21 paychecks. Just forget about 21 years and spend more every paycheck than they brought in. They can't go 21 paychecks. We've gone 21 years. They think this is ludicrous. So, I mean, I'll give you an example. In the state of, 46 states, I believe, have a balanced budget amendment. Every week I sat down with my budget committee, and I had to basically, as governor, make decisions that if we stay on this trend, and the following week they come back and they said, we've got to make some adjustments. And we would do that. It was my responsibility constitutionally. We don't have that now. I guess, we never had a printing press in West Virginia, so I guess that was the situation. But and no one takes seriously that we're spending more and we're not doing anything to make sure that we balance that out. Can't you? Either income or revenue or spending, or things have to change in order to balance that. There's no restrictions on us to live within the means that every citizen in America has to, every business that's successful, small or large, has to, and adjustments have to be made. And the only adjustment we make is to agree to spend more. And there's a lot of people that understand this is a fiscal cliff, and we're getting closer and closer. Now, this warning shot, I think, by Fitch's is this. I don't think it'll take 12 years for Moody to step up to the plate. That's awful to say. But if they don't, they're the ones that are watching and evaluating. We don't even do a risk management. We do nothing at all until we hit the fiscal cliff every year. We'll raise it because we have to pay more and we have to spend more. We spent more and we have to raise it to pay our bills. We're always going to pay the bills. I agree.
The next piece along this same line was done 9 years ago. 9 years ago, but boy, it's relevant today. Norah O'Donnell and Charlie Rose back then were interviewing then Senator Tom Coburn. And Tom Coburn, and since that time he retired from the Senate because he had cancer, and then he died actually shortly thereafter. So this is, deceased Senator Tom Coburn, but a live interview from 9 years ago, and he did what was called, he prepared what was called the Waste Book. And the Waste Book was a compilation, and they're interviewing, talking about this, a compilation of the research that he had done on all of the waste that Washington has created by voting for pork and, various kinds of goodie programs. Usually when they do things like that, you think, why would somebody ever try to spend money on these goofy programs that don't mean anything? What happens is when they need somebody's vote, they say, we need your vote. We'll throw in this, whatever you want. We'll throw it in the bill if you'll just vote for it. And that's how that gets in there. And so, but he's identifying that. The point he makes, and the point Senator Manchin made, is this is on both sides of the aisle. Republicans and Democrats are both almost equally responsible for the waste. Now, here's where I kind of go with this. The Democrats do not pretend to be small government and small spenders. They're big spenders, and they do not have a problem with it. The Republicans do the same thing, and then when it comes to the debt ceiling, they pretend like all of a sudden they're fiscally responsible and don't want to raise the debt ceiling. So they're hypocrites, and the Democrats are big spenders. Both equally responsible. So so what Coburn points out, yeah, it's Republicans and Democrats coming at it from different perspectives. Now, I would say, just to give a caveat, there are probably a few congressmen and a few senators who would align with Senator Coburn and Senator Manchin, but there aren't very many. And so it's kind of it's a disease, I guess, in Washington. But this is what we're dealing with, and what happened this last week with the downgrade. What we're dealing with is debt, interest on debt, and Fitch's view, the rating agency Fitch, their view of what's going on is they have seen decades of irresponsibility of congressmen, congresswomen not being responsible and just spending, the debt going up and up and up. And now I'll show you in a minute, the debt is just going, and the interest on the debt is going crazy. And so that's resulted in a downgrade in our credit, which means it exacerbates the problem. So now, instead of having X amount of interest, which by the way is about double what it was 2 years ago, because the interest rates have gone up. Now, with a downgrade of our credit, we, the United States of America, will be paying higher interest rates because we're less credit worthy. So it's a compounding problem. So anyway, listen to this interview by Norah O'Donnell and Charlie Rose interviewing then Senator Tom Coburn.
$1 million to build a bus stop in Virginia, $5 million for customized crystal stemware, just some of the items paid for by the federal government last year.
And a new report out today details $30 billion in questionable spending. Nancy Cordes is on Capitol Hill with a first look. Nancy, good morning.
Good morning, Norah and Charlie. Here's another one for you. $1.5 billion to keep the lights on in unused and underutilized federal building. That's another one of the examples laid out in this huge report called the Waste Book. Some of the numbers are staggering, like the $7 billion worth of U.S. military equipment being destroyed as U.S. troops pull out of Afghanistan. Then there's spending that just seems silly, like a nearly $1 million grant for something called the Popular Romance Project, a website and documentary that celebrates romantic movies, books, and pop songs. $2 million to renovate a rarely visited Civil War grist mill in Virginia, and $3 million for NASA employees to attend seminars on how Congress works.
Where was the adult in the room when these things were going on?
The Waste Book is the work of Republican Senator Tom Coburn of Oklahoma, a longtime deficit hawk.
It's a compilation of about $30 billion of stupidity, incompetence, and waste.
By comparison, the compromise budget Congress struck last week cuts the deficit by just $23 billion over 10 years. Congress has banned earmarks, those pork barrel special interest projects that were used to grease palms in Washington. But other types of waste have proved tougher to tackle, like the $3.6 billion in unpaid income taxes from federal employees and retirees, or the $400 million paid to government workers to do nothing during the government shutdown. How many years have you been putting this book out?
I think this is the 5th or 6th year.
And have you ever gotten any traction in Congress where members actually say, you know what, we're going to get rid of this?
No, they don't pay attention to it because it's hard work to get rid of junk. It's hard work to do oversight. It's hard work to hold the agencies accountable. And so what they'd rather do is look good at home, get reelected, and continue to spend money. And that's Republican and Democrat alike.
Coburn argues it doesn't really matter whether the priorities laid out here are Democrat or Republican. He says the question is, can we afford to do things like pay people to like the State Department on Facebook when we're borrowing hundreds of billions of dollars a year?
Next, I want to play a piece from David Zervos being interviewed. He's the chief economist for Jefferies, and he's talking about this idea of good news and bad news. Good news is the economy is strong in a number of areas, not in every area, but there is some strength in the economy. There's strength in wage growth. But what that does, it gives the Fed permission to raise rates because they believe the economy can withstand it in order to counter inflation. But the more, we've already had a lot of rate increases and rates have gone, relatively speaking, pretty high. And so there's a feeling now that we're getting toward the end of that cycle of rate hikes. And at some point, we're going to go into rate decreases. And what he points out is that the market, the stock market and the bond market, both markets have priced into them 120 basis point reductions next year. That's priced in. So if we don't get those reductions, I won't say it's going to crash, but the market is coming down because they're expecting things are going to get better, meaning rate reductions. We're not done. The Fed is not done raising rates. So anyway, that's an interesting piece from him, and take a listen.
David, good to have you here to weigh in. Put this in context for us, and we've been discussing what it might mean, what it doesn't mean, but also it's coming at a time when markets are digesting what the Bank of Japan did or didn't do last week, and yields have been moving higher in general.
Yeah, Mike, I think you summed it up very well in your initial take here. There's a lot going on that is affecting the long end of the bond market, and that in turn is affecting people's thoughts on valuation in stocks. I think what the BOJ did last week is still being digested. We've seen a very significant rise in long-term yields in Japan, and people are reassessing what they think the buying out of Japan, one of the largest buyers of foreign securities in the fixed income markets, what that will be coming out of the next couple quarters, if not longer. So these are big moves and big changes as we move toward a 1% yield target in the JGB market or in the 10-year JGB market. And then, of course, you have the data today. The ADP data was strong. The data we've had pretty much across the board has been strong. We've seen good data in GDP. We've seen weaker inflation, but we've seen good news data all around. And I think that's that's going to keep people's thoughts that the Fed is going to keep pressure up here for a while. And remember, Mike, we have 120 basis points of rate cuts priced into the market for 2024. That is a lot of rate cuts. And that is what's priced into the stock market as well. And if we start to maneuver some of that out over time and re-steepen out that part of the yield curve, that part of the money market curve, or the projection of where money market rates are going to be, I think it's going to weigh on stocks. It's going to steepen the curve out a little bit, and it's going to be kind of a little simpatico with what we're seeing today in markets.
Next, the final piece I want to play for you is Andrew Sorkin interviews Dan Niles from Centauri Fund, and he's asking him about really where's the market going from here. They as a fund have done very well, and but it's like, okay, where do you see us going? And Dan Niles, who has a good track record, says it looks like we're going into, from here, the market is going down about 10%. He calls it a correction, a 10% correction. In other words, from here, the stock market, equity market, from here, it does not have growth built into it until it goes through this correction. So what I see and what he's pointing out, probably in the coming months, could be this month, next month, the fall, I don't know, but at some point in the not too distant future, he's saying, before the end of the year, he's saying about a 10% correction. Based on everything that I've read and believe, I think that's about right. But there are others who are predicting more than that. Maybe there's some who are saying it's going to go to the moon. I don't know, but I don't read that much. But anyway, this is an interesting interview, and he gives the reasons for why he believes there is going to be a 10% correction, and they all seem right to me. Take a listen.
The July employment report is showing a gain now of 187,000 jobs last month. That is below expectations of 200,000, and the unemployment rate ticking down to 3.5%. We're, of course, also paying close attention to Apple and Amazon after both the tech giants reported quarterly earnings diverged a bit. Joining us right now to talk about all of this, Dan Niles, founder and senior portfolio manager at the Satori Fund. Good morning to you. Let's go broad first, given the jobs numbers, given maybe what you think the Fed is or isn't going to do as a function of it, and just the run, frankly, that the equity market has been on. Where are you broadly right now?
I mean, right now, it wouldn't surprise me to see a 10% correction between now and year end, because I think the main thing is you're now getting to much more difficult compares relative to inflation. CPI peaked at 9.1% in June of last year. And if you look at what's going on right now, you've got about 50% more job openings than people unemployed. Average hourly earnings are up 4.4%. You've seen all these strikes going on. And the big thing underneath this is oil is surging. It was down about $67 back in the middle of June. It's now over 80, and that feeds into a lot of costs. And then in addition to that, between what Japan's doing with yield curve control and the US Treasury having to go ahead and issue about $1 trillion this quarter, $850 billion in Q4, that's going to put upward pressure on yields. And that's really been a big driver of multiples expanding because it hasn't been earnings. Earnings are down this year. It's the multiple going.
Okay, now I'm going to shift gears, go into a few charts, and just a few of them, and then I'll wrap up. So the first chart is on U.S. job openings. This is in the manufacturing sector. So there are other sectors in the economy, and then including government. But in the manufacturing sector, a very important part of our economy, you can see that the job openings are going down kind of significantly in the last couple of years. So I would say it looks like the job market is tightening up. It's been high demand for jobs, and today there's less. When you get over into the tech sector, if you know people in the tech sector, they will tell you that jobs are getting harder to come by in the tech sector because of layoffs, and they have been hit hard for spending, and they're trying to prop up their earnings, so they're getting rid of personnel. This has certainly been true of the big tech companies, but in manufacturing sector, not dissimilar, being represented by the amount of job openings. The ADP private non-farm employment model month over month, again, manufacturing sector, you can see for the past several months, 5 months, including the most current month, have all been negative. So compare again month over month. So compared to 2021 and 2022, when it was mostly positive. So again, showing the signs of a component in the economy, meaning the labor market, that is negative. The bond yields for both short-term, intermediate-term, and long-term bonds have all been going up. And the downgrade in the U.S. credit for this past week didn't help that. They continue to go up. And what that means, and the reason I say it that way, is what it means is the price of bonds or bond funds is coming down. And they have been down, but they're coming down further. So this is good news for people who are buying bonds, but it's not good news for investors who are, let's say, buy and hold investors, 60-40 portfolios. Equities and bonds last year, 2022, both had a big down year, and especially bonds. Bonds in a number of cases were down more than equities. So they did nothing to protect against equity risk. This year, equities have, generally speaking, most of them have gone up, but bonds have continued to go down. And I'll show this tomorrow in my presentation on the market analysis. But it's interesting to see if you're in a 60-40 portfolio, buy and hold portfolio, and you've got an allocation to bonds, which are bond funds, which most people do, you may say, why is this not going anywhere? This is probably a good part of the reason. The interest rates and bond yields have a spillover effect over into the mortgage market. So mortgages, as you know, what was it, a couple of years ago, were down at 2.5% to 3%. You could probably find something, at least in the shorter term mortgages, down around 2.5%, and you didn't have to look very far to get one at 3%. Today, what I'm showing this chart is they are up over 7% now. The average 30-year fixed mortgage, again, this is average, so there's exceptions, but on average, the mortgage is up over 7%. What that means is this is going to hit, or is already hitting, the housing market, which has been very tight, is still tight in some areas, but it's the multiple offers and people bidding up prices and so forth is becoming less, and in some cases, in a number of cases, price reductions are starting to happen. And I think this is a big contributor to that. My favorite philosopher, I guess one of them, Will Rogers, said, "A debt is just as hard for a government to pay as it is for an individual. No debt ever comes due at a good time. Borrowing is the only thing that seems handy all the time." That applies to a number of people, and it applies certainly to Congress. Thank you for watching. If you have questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. Thank you.